I've been around longer than many. Fortunately, I'm 84 years old. I started the gay movement in 1958. And my coming of age regarding trans people happened over a period of 10 or 20 years. Probably really beginning in the late 60s, early 70s. And then Marsha P. Johnson, who now is incredibly well known worldwide, happened to move in with me and lived with me for 10 or 12 years. And through her, I started becoming really aware of the terrible things that happen to trans people. And I had been a typical ignorant, cisgender, male chauvinist pig, male homosexual transphobe in my youth because I had no understanding whatsoever. Because of Christine Jorgensen's story that she couldn't have relations with a member of the same sex because that would be against God's law. She was a devout Catholic. I had this crazy idea, totally wrong, that transsexuals were guilt-ridden homosexuals who were castrating themselves just to fit into society. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. But through knowing Marsha and through meeting a series of other people, I came to realize, especially when Marsha lived with me, about the terrible situation that people went out and you couldn't fit into society. No one would hire you. A lot of people were forced into sex work. And some of these people, like Marsha P. Johnson, in my opinion, would be the first transgender saint in the Roman Catholic Church because she was the blessing of my life. I never had anything in my life equal the experience of living with Marsha P. Johnson. And I had been an arch enemy because of a nasty description I had made in a newspaper about Sylvia Rivera. But at Marsha's funeral, we buried the hatchet. And after 20 years of being arch enemies, in the next 10 years, we started talking. I filmed her on the pier, which you can see on YouTube, several videos. The best one is Sylvia Rivera was more than just a Stonewall veteran. And I felt so guilty. I became very active with Sylvia. I hired her. She became first a worker in my shop, and then she became manager of my shop. And I was there when she pulled the various groups of people together from different parts of town and organized the very first march specifically for trans rights in the late part of the century. And I know when they went up to picket Amanda Milan's murder in the doorway of the Port Authority, and finally for the first time, the New York Times, which had said a man wearing a dress was killed in the doorway of the Port Authority, they actually went and had a demonstration there, and finally the issue of gender identity began to be explored and understood by the major media. And I really want to thank my dear friend. Oh my God, my mind's going. Oh, this is the worst. Jamie Hunter, who has been my dear friend since 1992, and she gave me all the facts about Rusty that I didn't know. Now, there are two things in life. There's what you call kind of the official, respectable success. You know, you have a career. And Rusty did all those things. Rusty was a Fulbright scholar. She spoke 5 languages. She taught at a university, economics. You know, she was a married man and had children. And all of these things, and in 1992, she transitioned at the same time that Chelsea did, and they had decided that they would get a house Now, Marcia and Sylvia, back in the 70s, had decided that really a house was necessary for all these poor girls that were ending up with nowhere to go on the street. So they started something called Star House, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which only lasted a few months, but became famous because it was a dream, and the dream they had was they would have a functional place that people like themselves could go and find shelter and protection, and would have a community of sorts. And that was very short-lived, 6 months, because they had nothing, and the people that you get that are thrown out on the streets don't have resources, but it was a dream they had, just like America had a dream of going to the moon. And what happened with that dream was that while Star House failed, Chelsea and Rusty came together and they got this house in Brooklyn, and they achieved that dream. They actually created a functioning, living household, which became, not necessarily by choice, because there's a wonderful documentary on YouTube called Change House about how they had thought, well, let's get a house and we'll have some nice friends move in, and we'll have this nice, compatible, like all trans environment. We'll have our own little community. But word got around in New York City among the social workers and everything that if we have this person who is trans and we can't put them in a men's shelter because that would cause havoc, and they won't be allowed in the women's shelter because they're technically still males. Have you heard? There's a house in Brooklyn. So it's sort of like they became the shelter system of all the problem children on the streets of New York City, because they had such incredible hearts and such incredible, wonderful personalities. They couldn't turn people away. And let me tell you, some of the problems that you can end in that situation, I don't know how. And Rusty, having an economics background, if you see the documentaries back from turn of the century, they were having the girls have work. They were trying to have calling services and stuff like that. And they realized that to function in this society, you have to have skills, you have to earn a living. Because if not, you're thrown out on the street, and then all you are, there's nothing left to do but sell your body. And maybe only up to 12 people at a time were staying there, but over a period of 15 years, hundreds of people had their lives touched and saved through the house. They called it Transy House in Brooklyn and Park Slope. And I always think of them having taken the dream that Marcia and Sylvia had, and the dream that someday there would be a functioning, viable community and places where people that didn't fit into society as it's generally structured would be able to go and find shelter and find love and find community, and would be able to grow and mature and live. And one of the people, ironically, I was at a CLAGS meeting, and Sylvia Rivera was working for me at the time. I took her in, and then she was rooming in the place for a while, but then they had a homeless peer. They were all alcoholics on this side. On the other side, they were all crack addicts or whatever. But in there, it was a little community in theirs, and finally the city shut them down. She moved in with me, and was with me for 6 months or so. And I think it was one of the early flag meetings, Sylvia got up and let it be known that she was homeless. And Chelsea, I hope my mind has it exactly right, but Chelsea came over and said to Sylvia Rivera, I was one of the girls that you took in when I was homeless.
That's an apocryphal story. That did not happen.
It didn't?
That's an apocryphal one.
I could have sworn I heard it.
No, that rumor is going around, but if I I'm only 62. That's apocryphal.
I apologize, but you know, maybe someone told it to me. I tell you, there are times a few years ago I couldn't remember Hillary Clinton's last name. Do you know how frightening that is? She was the president's wife. He was president. What was the last name? That happens to you when you get older, especially when it comes to names. So anyway, what they did, they made history. All kinds of successful people, they make millions of dollars and build empires and all that, don't even get an obituary in the New York Times. Rusty Mae Moore got half a page in the New York Times because she did something that no one else had done to this point, and she has laid a plan work and shown a vision that other people, I believe, will take and will grow on, and that is something that makes you a great person and a great human being, and her inspiration to the world, as she certainly was an inspiration to me, and she is one of my heroes, and I salute her, and I'm so honored to have had contacted with both of these people in my life. Thank you.